Hello, everyone. Welcome to another week of healthcare analytics. This week, we're looking at the relationship between two variables. There are a number of these in healthcare. One that's obvious is the relationship between a variable, the length of stay in a hospital, and the second variable being the cost of the hospital stay. Longer length of stay, higher cost. The other one would be things like PSA and the relation of prostate cancer and many, many others. Let's take a look at some of the things we'll be discussing. And again, you'll see a lot of statistical terms in here. We're not trying to turn you into biostatisticians, but we're looking for you to understand what some of these things mean and how they relate to healthcare. Rather than be intimidated, by what these things like chi-squared is, if this stuff appears to be challenging, read the first and last sentence in each paragraph. So, for instance, with chi-squared, you see that it is, in fact, a statistical test that's used to test for a relationship between categorical variables. It may be generated by computer software or an online statistical calculator. So basically, it's talking about the relationship between these two variables. You'll see other ones throughout this. And what I would advise is take a look at some of these things and walk yourself through, like this one in 6.1. We're not going to be using R to perform a chi-square test, but it's important to understand what chi-square means. Our role as health information professionals is to understand the relationship and what happens to the data we collect. While it's useful to understand how these things are calculated, how to calculate a chi-square, it's more important to understand the meaning of what these things are. Anyway, that's what we'll be covering this week. If you have any questions about this material, please reach out and I'll be glad to help you. That's all I have. We'll see you online. Bye now.